Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our quarterly webinar. My name is Dr. Tamara Warren. I am appointee for the City of Columbia's Climate Protection Action Committee, and we are so excited for you to be a part of our quarterly webinar where we're going to be touching on sustainability issues. But this month, we're going to be taking a very unique and different spin, and I think a lot of you are going to actually enjoy this topic. And so we're going to be talking about faith, hope, and sustainability, looking at communities of faith that are going green within the City of Columbia and within the Midlands area. So sustainability issues really know no bounds when we're talking about climate change, food resiliency, and things of that nature. And a lot of times we talk about these issues in a lot of other areas, whether it's politics, whether it's within education. But this evening, we have the opportunity to actually talk about it in something that is very important in a lot of our lives, within our religions, within our beliefs, and within our faiths. And so we have some exciting interviews that we're going to conduct as well as hear from. Also, we're going to see some great initiatives that are taking place within the Midlands area. And we're going to take a look at a few videos that may pique a little interest, may build up some conversations, but nonetheless, the opportunity for this webinar is to really engage in some constructive dialogue and conversation about sustainability, climate change, and how that all intertwines with the faiths, the religions, and beliefs that we have. So before we start getting into our guests, what we want to do is actually kind of walk through some of those places of worship that we have here in Columbia and kind of just give you an idea of what the kind of secrets that we have here. So, as I've mentioned, this webinar, we're looking at faith, hope, and sustainability, touching on communities of faith that are going green in the City of Columbia as well as the Midlands area. And so what we're going to show are actually some of these places of worship that either you may attend or you're familiar with because it's in your neighborhoods or it's in your communities. And so there are quite a few places of worship that touch on a lot of different faiths and beliefs. One of the great things about the Midlands area, or just about our country as a whole, is that we have the opportunity to go to places and commune with individuals that share the same beliefs as ourselves. But we also have the opportunity to be in commune with individuals where we have different beliefs, we have different thoughts about things, but we're able to come together and still live in harmony. We may not always get it right, but at least we have that opportunity to do such. And so here's just kind of some of the different places of worship that we have, again, within the City of Columbia or the Midlands area. And it may be reflective of, honestly, some of the other places that we see across the country. Along with our places of worship, we also see that there are opportunities to really be sustainable. And so there are some places where you can actually do, if you drive your electric vehicles, you're able to fill up at those places. As well as we see various initiatives that are taking place at some of our places of worship, such as the Tree of Life Rain Garden that is located at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And so again, what we're going to be looking at is some different interviews, some different initiatives, different things that are taking place within a community, as well as having some great conversations with individuals. Now, as you have seen the various places of worship that we have around the City of Columbia, as well as the Midlands area, we're actually going to focus on one in particular where, again, you might have seen it in the community or you actually may be a part of the congregation. we're going to take a look at a clip from Shandon Presbyterian Church, and one of their members, Dr. Robert Walker, is going to show you exactly what the church has done in order to be more sustainable. Now, the great thing is we're going to look at some initiatives and some practices that they have done that on one hand may have taken a little bit of investment, but others will actually show it's just best management practices that they have done. So again, we're going to take a look at the efforts that are taking place at Shandon Presbyterian Church.
All right, so several years back, our church went into a partnership with Control Management Incorporated, located right here in Columbia, and they came in and designed a program for us to control all of our HVAC systems, and they scaled out our entire building into this computer program and came in and rewired all of our systems so that every individual classroom, office, and gathering space has its own thermostat. With this system, we can go in at any time and check on any individual units, any air handler, any water pump, any of the 5 boilers that we have, the giant cooling tower out in the parking lot, to see if they're all good. And this system has greatly increased our efficiency and our ability to manage our utility costs throughout our facility, because each of these rooms has a set schedule by day and by week. So our building is really 4 different buildings, some dating back almost 100 years old. About 6 or 7 years ago, they went throughout the entire facility and replaced all the exterior windows with these double pane gas filled windows to replace mostly old casement single pane windows, which offer virtually no insulation at all. So these windows offer probably 5 to 7 times the insulation value, and it's really helped us with heating and cooling costs. And of course, they're all well sealed and no draftiness. So it's been a great benefit. What you don't realize when you're in here is above this ceiling, all the way up the entire ceiling, the entire length, there's 8 to 12 feet of attic between that the ceiling that you see and the roof. And the entire attic area has been closed in with 5 to 6 inch foam spray, so that that area is basically like a giant ice chest, so we have this huge buffer between our ceiling and the roof, so it never gets super hot in the summer, and it certainly helps hold the heat in the winter from escaping out through the roof. The way I hold and read the scripture, I see in the very beginning of Genesis, God's very first commandment to humanity was to take care of the garden, to take care of God's creation. And so I take that very seriously, as does this congregation. And we see that we are not to just use the earth for our own purposes and for our own enjoyment, but to partner with God in the care of creation, and to try to never take more than we give. We have aspirations of being carbon neutral. We don't have a set plan for that, but we have some very motivated and active folks in our church who are in our outreach committee on environmental stewardship, and that's a high goal of theirs. And we as a congregation wanting to do that. I mean, we've done so many things we've eliminated plasticware and styrofoam from our kitchen and hospitality services. We've done all the work around the church with new windows, new lighting, new insulation. We're moving towards solar power. All of these things are seeking to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce our pollution, amount of pollution, and trying to set an example for our neighborhood and for our world about what it means to be good stewards.
But then there are also things that a place of worship or any entity would be able to do. So some of the things that Dr. Walker kind of talked about was trying to install an upgraded digital system. There actually may be resources or funding that is available for a place of worship or another institution that will like to move in that direction. They also talked about upgrading their windows, and so going to the double pane gas field, and so that can help with efficiencies. They also talked about some of the smaller things that a place of worship could do. So if you look at maybe after your church service or whatever service that your service of worship that you're doing, maybe think about changing from your plasticware or those that cannot be or aren't biodegradable or can't be broken down, and maybe going to something that is more biodegradable, or even encouraging individuals within your places of service to actually bring their reusable materials. There are a lot of different things that can be done that are cost effective or doesn't take a great amount of money. And so we thank Shandon Presbyterian Church for sharing their different best management practices, but we definitely encourage you to kind of do a search out there and see what you can do that can be cost effective or works well for your place of worship's budget. So the next thing that we're going to do is take a clip or look at a clip for someone who considers themselves a climate scientist as well as a person of faith. So we're going to look at Katharine Hayhoe. She's going to share her perspective on some of the issues that we may see in our denominations when it comes to climate change and the ways in which we actually deal with certain communities. Now, I will give the heads up. This may be a video that gives us a pause or a moment for conversation, but what we want to do is have the conversation started. And so this is likely something that I'll take bits and pieces, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about it with our upcoming guests. So our next clip, we're going to see Katharine Hayhoe talk about climate science and how that kind of plays out in some of our religions, our faiths, and our beliefs.
I'm an evangelical, so climate can't be changing because God's in control, not us. And even if it is, who cares? The world's going to end anyways. That's what all evangelicals think, right? When we poll people in the United States about whether they think climate is changing because of humans, and if we ask how worried they are about it, it's true. There is one group that ends up at the bottom, and that is white evangelicals. Only 28% of us say that humans are responsible. And curiously, only 45% of white Catholics also agree, compared to 77% of Hispanic Catholics. But don't they have the same Pope? It isn't being Catholic or evangelical that makes us doubt the science. It's something else. What is an evangelical anyways? There are as many definitions for us as there are books in the Bible, so I'm going to go with one I got from a man named Leith Anderson. Leith is a pastor who's also the president of the National Association of Evangelicals in the United States, so he knows his stuff. And this is what he says. Evangelicals are people who take the Bible seriously. Our first clue came from the polls, and now for our second clue, we're going to go to the Bible. If evangelicals take it seriously, what does it have to say about climate change and all that kind of stuff? The first book and the first chapter is Genesis 1. It talks about how humans were made in the image of God. If you ever went to Sunday school, you probably heard that one. But then it tells us why. So that we humans could be responsible for every living thing on the planet. Now, some translations turn that into dominion over the earth. But even so, would we respect someone who had dominion over a company or a nation and ran it into the ground? Of course not. All of us respect wise stewardship when it comes to being in charge of something. And that's what Genesis is talking about. We are stewards or caretakers of the people, animals, plants, and all living things on this planet. Moving forward through the Bible, there's a lot of verses that speak of God's love and care for creation. But there are also a few verses that people pick out and apply out of context to support their point. For example, there's a verse that says there will always be seasons. So people say, well, how can global warming be real if there always will be winter and summer? Well, did you know that seasons are caused by the Earth's orbit around the sun? And humans aren't affecting that yet. So of course there will always be winter and summer here in the Northern Hemisphere. They'll just be warmer. Then there's the verse about how God will never destroy the earth again with a flood. And so people use that to say sea level isn't rising. First of all, it is. Thousands of gauges around the world are pretty clear on that. But second, even if all the ice sheets on Earth melted, there would still be dry land left, just not nearly as much. And because so many of us live near the coastlines, it's estimated that about a third of us, that's 2.5 billion people, live on land that would be underwater if the ice sheets melted. But that doesn't mean the Earth will be entirely destroyed. So getting back to the main theme of the Bible, in the New Testament, we learn, for example, of people who had quit their jobs and were waiting around, sitting on their hands for the world to end and Christ to return. The Apostle Paul wrote to those people in the letter to the Thessalonians, and in no uncertain terms told them to work with their hands. In other words, to support their family, and elsewhere to care for the widows and the orphans too. Whether we believe in the end of the world or not, we're not supposed to be sitting around waiting for it, because most of all, throughout the entire Bible, we find verses about love for others, particularly those less fortunate than ourselves. And that, as everyone from Pope Francis to Leith Anderson reminds us, is why we care about a changing climate. Because it disproportionately affects the poor and the vulnerable, those who, if food prices double, can't afford to feed their families. If sea level rises, have nowhere to go. If water runs out, become refugees far from home. It's crystal clear from both the social science and from the Bible that our objections to the science of climate change have nothing to do with being religiously evangelical. They have everything to do with being politically evangelical. As Galen Carey, a former missionary and now the vice president of the National Association of Evangelicals, says, many evangelicals oppose actions to slow climate change, not on a religious basis, but on a political one, because they believe the government wants to take away their freedom. Bishop Ephraim Tendero is the Secretary General of the World Evangelical Alliance, representing 600 million people around the world. He was also an official member of the Philippine delegation to the Paris Climate Conference. And when one evangelical asked Bishop F why he cares about climate change, and then added, "Don't you read the scriptures?" he replied, "Yes, I do read the scriptures, and that's why I care."
Okay, we ended a little bit early, but I hope you found the video a little intriguing, and I believe it's going to help us kind of guide some of the questions that we're going to do in our next segment, where we're going to do an interview with our guests who you see on the screen. So first, I would like to introduce you to Rabbi Jonathan Case, who is with Beth Shalom Synagogue here in the city of Columbia. So Rabbi Case, welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be with you.
Thank you. It's good to have you with us. And so we just showed a little video where it was talking about maybe the evangelical perspective about climate change, and kind of the role that that plays in the church or a place of worship itself. But what I would like to start off with is you kind of sharing more about yourself and Beth Shalom Synagogue and kind of the things that you're thinking about when it comes to either sustainability or climate change, and then we could go further into the discussion.
Well, if I go off course, you'll put me back on course, all right?
No problem.
All right, very good. So we believe in our faith tradition and our theology that God created a world that was not complete, a world that had to be completed, and it was our task as humanity to finish that job, to make sure that it's almost like building a house, that one portion of the house was left unfinished. Then God, as the master architect, as the word says, you take that corner of the house and you finish it off. So the idea that we use our ingenuity and our creativity and all our God-given abilities to be able to craft a house worthy of living in is very important. We should always use our minds to the betterment of humanity. And are there limits to that ability to be able to craft a reasonably good house for us to live in? Well, most certainly there are, because no sooner do we open up the Bible than we come to a story after the Garden of Eden takes place, where the world is flooded because mankind, humankind, does not know how to treat one another and the earth and animals with respect, with dignity, with a sense of a responsibility, that we have a responsibility to each other and to the universe at the same time. So there's an undercurrent, and I don't mean to make a pun here by that, but there's an undercurrent in the story of Noah that we have not just the right to use our intelligence to try to craft a world that is comfortable for us, but craft a world that is meaningful, important, and sustainable. And to that end, I want to share a very ancient story with you, which is bordering on bizarre, considering it's more than 3,000 years old.
Okay.
Story goes like this. Very short. God says to humankind soon after the creation, I've created a world that is good. You see that word good throughout the beginning of the Bible, and it was good. That God saw that it was good. You see that several times. So God saw that his world was good. But then in this ancient fragment document that is again 3,000 years old, God also adds, take care of it, because I'm not putting anyone after you to make it right. So it's not like we have the option of treating the world with dignity and respect, because God's made it clear to us that this is our universe and he's not going to come clean up our mess. We make a mess. We've got to clean up our mess. And if there's global warming, and if our crops are failing, and if the seas are rising, and if there's terrible storms that happen in places where they've never occurred before, we have to take our finger and point it at ourselves. Our responsibility is to take care of the world, or the world, again, using the phraseology of the Bible, the earth will vomit us out.
Thank you for that. And so I think one of the things that you have touched on, which was also covered in the two clips prior to this portion, is the idea of being a steward of God's creation. And so can you kind of speak to that, of what actually stewardship should be or should look like when it comes to taking care of the environment, whether it's the natural raw materials or resources, or it's other things? And so what does stewardship look like for you?
Two hands. On one hand, God says, and I'm going back to the Bible again, God says, take the world and subdue it. Does that mean that we can use it and crush it until there's nothing left? No, the responsibility is that we have to take care of the world. In fact, let me use one other biblical phrase, and then we talk about the present, because I don't want to all dwell in theology in the Bible. But in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, when you go to war and you besiege a city, you may not cut down the trees or that surround the city. Now, who would do such a thing? Well, we would. We've done it countless times. When we're trying to starve a civilization out, we cut down all the trees surrounding the community so that there'll be no shelter for them, and they'll starve to death, and they'll have no protection. But yet the Bible goes out of its way and says, don't cut the trees down. I mean, not that the Bible is for war. The Bible is utterly against the idea of going to war. But at the same time, if we do, that doesn't mean that we start desecrating the land on which we live. Stewardship, absolutely. We've got this responsibility that is a mandate, that we have to take care of the world. The world has taken care of us. For how many centuries, for how many millennia has the world taken care of us? Mom took care of us. Yeah? Our mothers took care of us. When our mother gets old, we need to take care of our mother, our father. The earth is our mother. We need to take care of our mother, because she's not always going to be able to give to us, especially when we've so degraded and hurt her, rife with putting up so many things that are toxic in the environment that just cannot be fixed except by time. One more thought, if I can throw this in too. So, as a Jew, we have the Sabbath, which is Saturday. As a Christian, there's Sunday, which is the Sabbath. As a Muslim, there is Friday, which is the Sabbath. Now just stay with me for one moment, okay? If every Muslim, if every Jew, if every Christian observed the Sabbath, just gave the earth one day by itself, leave the world alone. That's what the purpose of the Sabbath is. Leave the world alone for one day a week. The earth can take care of itself. But the trouble is, we work ourselves and we work the earth until there's little left to give of the earth and of ourselves.
Very good perspective, because even as we see with our own bodies, we need that time for rest. And so we should also see that the earth and the environment has that same concept as well. So thank you for pointing that out. One thing that I would like to ask, and it kind of came up in the clip, was an idea, and sorry for the viewing audience if you didn't quite get to see it. It talked about leading with love versus fear. And I would like to get your perspective on what that could mean as it relates to protecting the environment or being more sustainable in our practices. And so I think if we look at it outside the realm of religion or spirituality, we have that same conversation about leading with love versus fear because we see it politically and in other ways. But how do you think that actually applies when we talk about being stewards of the earth or just thinking about sustainability as a whole?
Forgive me, first of all, because I didn't see the clip.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to say something that's totally contradictory to it or totally wrong, please feel free to jump on me. Fear and love are almost diametrically opposite when it comes to human emotions. But yet I think both play a very integral role in terms of the earth, in terms of the way that we treat the earth. We should be in fear of what we're doing to it. We should have a sense like, oh my God, the earth is warming up. Oh my God, species are dying. Oh my God, we're using up vast resources of the earth quicker than they can be replenished. Oh my God, we're sending out CO2 into the air, and at a rate which the earth cannot. So there's a sense of fear that is appropriate. Love, absolutely, because love can be the antithesis or the cure to the fear. Maybe if we take the attitude of love towards the world in which we live, it's not about putting up buildings. It's not about getting more power. What if we go out in nature and we can love nature? Do you remember the awe when you were a child and you saw a centipede? And maybe you screamed, it's a centipede. I've got a billion legs over there. I'm not going to touch it. Don't make me go near it. But it was awesome. It was wonderful to see this creature on the ground, or the maze that a spider web spins. With all of its delicacy and the filaments that blow up. That's, if you can see it and say, this is beautiful, this is rich, this is wonderful, and then that love and appreciation comes out. Why would I want to destroy the spider? Why would I want to destroy the nest? Why would I want to step on the centipede? Why would I want to destroy any of these beautiful things that nature has given us, the variegated colors, all the wonderful things that surround us? And life is miraculous. Yeah, in the Jewish tradition, we have this odd custom that we're supposed to say 100 blessings every day. 100 blessings. You might be wondering, do you have to take time to eat? But if you look at the world with wonder, if everything is miraculous, then you'll say a blessing over everything. How wonderful it is that I can look into your eyes. How wonderful it is that I have food on my table. How wonderful it is and miraculous it is that this tree wasn't there last year. Where did it come from? And that sense of, so that the diametrically opposed love and fear are really opposite sides of the same principle, I think, and they're both necessary. We should have fear of what we're doing and learn to love what we have.
And I think you bring up a very interesting point of having that connection back with the environment or with our surroundings. And so I'll look at an example of, if I think of my home that I have invested in financially, I bought things to make it comfortable for myself and for my family. And so I take pride in this place that I know where it's a place of refuge, it's a place of love. It's all of those things that I cherish, and I would never want to do anything to harm it or destroy it or, make it not pleasant. How do you think we as individuals, regardless of our faiths or beliefs, can look at the environment in the same light, that it's not something separate from us, but it is actually our home? I think there are some beliefs or religions or faiths where they kind of make that connection, like there is no difference between ourselves and humans and then the natural components. But how, as a whole, how can humanity get back to the point where we're not looking at the environment as the external, something that we're disconnected to or we have to have full dominion over, but it is actually something that we should cherish and protect, because essentially once it's gone, there's no getting it back.
No. We are in a symbiotic relationship with the universe. Everything works together in almost a magical way. I've spoken to many doctors who have expressed utter amazement that the body works, that we have the ability in our body to, right at this very moment, your body and mine are fighting off infections. Germs are all over the place. But the body is made in such a way that it has defenses that rise to it. But the same thing works on a macro level as well, that we as a world have everything built into it that is survivable and meaningful. And this, you brought up the example of our house. The world is our house, right? We have our individual homes in which we live in, which we take care of, which take care of us. And then there's the macro level where the world is our house, and the two are not divorced from one another. Everything is connected one with another. You probably know the old story about the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flaps its wings in South America, and there's a tidal wave, or I guess they call them tsunamis nowadays. Somewhere else in the world that like ripples in a pond, that everything affects. Everything. Nothing is meaningless. And no one is meaningless. Nothing is meaningless and no one is meaningless. Everything that we do, say, matters.
Thank you. Well, this has been a great conversation, and it's not going to end, but we're going to take a little pause and interject with an additional interview, which will hopefully give us additional talking points for the conversation that we're having with Rabbi Jonathan Case from Beth Shalom Synagogue. So we're going to break really briefly, and we're going to take a look at an interview with Bob Petrellis and Dr. Cynthia Mo Labita, who is with the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. And she's going to share a little bit about social justice and religious tenets. And so once that's finished, we'll take some points and we'll resume with this interview. So hold on tight as we transition to our second segment.
Theological Seminary. Dr. Cynthia Mo Labita is professor of theological and social ethics at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary and the Church Divinity School of the Pacific. She serves on several boards and advisory bodies, including the advisory group of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. Thank you for joining us. It's really great to have you to spend a few minutes with us. Mm-hmm. So several years ago, and the reason that I wanted to reach out to you in the first place, I read your book, Resisting Structural Evil, Love as Ecological Economic Vocation. And I was really fascinated by the way you connect concerns about social and ecological justice to Christian ethics. And I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about that.
Yeah. First, just thank you, Bob, for inviting me to do this. It's a delight. Thank you. Yeah. So in many ways, Christian ethics is about enabling people to live more fully what, according to Christian traditions, in one interpretation, living more fully what we're called to be, which is lovers, people who can love self and others and all of creation deeply, with a love that is not just a feeling or not just interpersonal, but includes the political, the economic, the structures that we live by. So we say that love in Jewish and Christian and Muslim traditions is justice seeking. So where there is injustice, love seeks to dismantle it. So I think of ethics as enabling us to live more fully as in response to God's call to love neighbor as self, with a form of love that is justice seeking. And that's the link to social justice and environmental justice, that again, where neighbor or self is being trodden down or degraded or killed or displaced by injustice, then the call is to seek to name that injustice and disclose it, unearth it, and then dismantle it.
That you direct the Center for Climate Justice and Faith there, and that this offers an opportunity for interested people to come together and really delve into these issues. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. The seminary where I teach, which is a small but mighty little Lutheran seminary here in the Berkeley area, last year, a year and a half ago, we founded a Center for Climate Justice and Faith. And the reason we call it climate justice is because one of the commitments in our curriculum is to prepare people for socially transformative ministry at the nexus of race, class, gender, and earth. And so in the center, we address climate change not only as an ecological issue, but also a matter of racial justice and economic justice and gender justice. So it's been really significant to give it that name and that commitment. We have launched a certificate, and the certificate is for people who are not seminary students, but just people in the broader community. And by broader at this point, we mean global, because we decided that this would be open to people from around the world, partly because we really want a mix of participants from Global South and Global North to inform and learn from one another. So it's a 9-month certificate. It involves about 2 hours a week of engagement, I would say, where people work in cohorts of about 10 with a learning guide and work on cultivating 4 different terrains, as we call it. One terrain is the terrain of knowledge about climate change, climate injustice, and also theological and biblical roots of moral power and spiritual power for addressing it. And a second terrain is the terrain of community building community within the cohort, but skills for community building in one's own context. And the third terrain is spiritual strength, because as we know, the future holds some very, very frightening realities due to climate change, and it will call forth a lot of spiritual strength within people. So that's the third terrain we cultivate. And the final one is skills, skills for doing the work of climate justice.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I think it probably kind of, it seems like it dovetails with some of the things we were just talking about with the center.
Mhm.
And also comes from your book,
Yeah.
is that you talked a lot about working with congregations and church groups to
Mhm.
increase their awareness of environmental justice and to
Mhm.
promote faith-based action of
Mhm.
all sorts of different kinds. And
Yeah.
I just wondered if suppose there was a church or a person in a church who was interested in getting started on
Mhm.
a project like this.
Mhm.
Do you have any advice or suggestions for kind of
Mhm.
how to get going?
You know, everything is contextual, Bob, and it really depends in part on where a congregation is located and where the people are in terms of awareness. But because if people are not aware of really the devastation of what is happening and will happen with climate change, that's an important place to begin. And I would say connecting to just getting in, deciding, making a commitment to learn about the impacts of climate change and who's being impacted. So, you know, one could say recognizing that our house is on fire, and that those most suffering and those who are already burning up, and I'm not just meaning just burning by fires, but by storms and floods and various things related to climate change, that those who are suffering the most are by far the people least responsible for it. So getting a grip on that reality that those of us who are most responsible for it by having greenhouse gas emitting lives and society are the most able to protect ourselves from it. So that's a moral travesty. So kind of, I think one place to begin is getting a grip on that and the reality that we are, by doing nothing, we're throwing more fuel on that fire. But then realizing that there is so much that we can do there's just so much we can do, and drinking that in and recognizing it, and then working together, not alone, but working together within a congregation, but with other groups also, with other faith groups and with other non-faith groups, you know, collaboratively working in contexts to move our country and our specific contexts within the country as rapidly as we can into non-fossil fuel based living.
This has just been really, really a wonderful conversation, and I think will help to move our thinking forward as we go along. And I really I hope maybe you'll have a few expressions of interest from people who might be interested in looking into the Center for Climate Justice and Faith. And
I'd like to thank Bob and Dr. Mo Labita for that great interview covering social justice and that intersection with religious ethics. She preferenced Christian ethics, but in the context of this conversation, we'll say religious ethics. And so, Rabbi Case, I want to return to our interview, but take some points from this particular segment. So we ended off our initial conversation talking about the connection that we as humans have with the environment and with the earth. And I believe part of that connection is understanding that we have a connection with one another. So regardless of our backgrounds, our faiths, or our beliefs, we're connected in some type of ways. And that's also understanding that there are going to be some communities that are vulnerable, whether it's those that are in the global South that are dealing with possibly with the sea rise, and so maybe their island nations may be in jeopardy, or there's areas that have food deserts. And so really understanding that when we're connected, that we also have to think about the challenges that our brothers and our sisters are dealing with. And so to one of the points that was mentioned in the interview with Bob and Dr. Mo Labita, can you kind of speak to the connection between social justice and what we talk about within our individual houses of worships or within our individual faiths?
Yeah, absolutely. There were several, it's funny how language is a reflection of where we are right now. The phrases that I heard, and that some of which you used as well is, for example, is food desert. That's a new phrase that just came into being because we realized there are places in our community right here in Columbia, and there are places all over the world that have become food deserts, where food is just not available in quantities, qualities, or that cannot be afforded. Other things like talking about social justice for the environment. Again, a new phrase that's come out. We have to kind of come up with new language to describe this jeopardy that we find ourselves in right now. This does beg the question, and forgive me, I am a rabbi. I cannot help but go back to text time and again and again.
Please.
One of the most fascinating, riveting segments of the Bible, which is least understood because people don't pay attention to it, is when at the beginning of the Bible, two brothers are fighting and Cain kills Abel, fratricide. He kills his brother, and then God asks him, "Where's your brother Abel?" And Cain responds, "Am I my brother's keeper?" What's interesting is what's not said after that. I mean, when you ask a question, don't you expect to get an answer? Where's the answer? So God does not answer the question, because if you need to ask the question, it doesn't matter what the answer is. Yeah. If you need to ask the question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" you've already counted yourselves out. So your very on target question about being our brother's keeper, being our neighbor's responsibility, and they are responsible. That is so vital that we take that seriously, that we've got to be compassionate for one another. Your larder may be just full of enough food. We'll have a snowstorm tomorrow, or an ice storm here in Columbia. And people are rushing out and they're buying gobs and gobs of, I wouldn't even go near a supermarket now for fear of being trampled. But I wonder, if I went into those houses, how many of those houses have so much food they end up throwing them out, that their closets are so full of food. We don't need this much. We don't need to collect this much. And this is an opportunity maybe to reflect and think about it as we have this conversation, to start sharing that stuff with other people in these food deserts, in these arid wastelands that we've created. The answer to Cain's question is an answer that God's still waiting for us to respond to. God's not going to answer the question. If we don't know the answer, then we're dooming ourselves. Yeah, we have to take care of one another. And that global responsibility, whether it's sharing our food, making sure that these food deserts are replenished, to care for one another by not buying these huge, massive gas guzzling machines, but rather paring down what we have. We don't need so much. I remember it was about 20 years ago, maybe 30, actually, it's probably more like 40 years ago. I seen a bumper sticker on a car. Bumper sticker read, "He who dies with the most toys wins." And you know what? That's the attitude of so many people. It's a lie. It's deception. Because you got more, it doesn't make you rich. Doesn't mean you win anything. We're all born naked and we all die naked.
Absolutely. And so that does make me think about when we talk about how much each of us, either individuals or households, how much that we have. We looked at a clip a little bit earlier that talked about some of the best management practices that are being done at Shandon Presbyterian Church, where, you know, they're looking at the materials that they're purchasing. Can they make some changes in that sense, maybe going from something that is disposable to can be reusable, or even looking at ways, maybe doing an investment in changing their heating systems. And so I am curious, as you look at your place of worship, the actual facility itself, how do you think there are ways that you would be able to kind of implement some changes that may be able to be mirrored back to your congregation? So kind of how can places of worship actually be the example that they want for their congregations, kind of giving them, you know, the push to these are the things that we possibly need to do. So let me be the example for you back at your individual spaces.
Right on target. Yeah. Do as I do. You're not going to do as I say. You're going to do as I do. You know, we tend to follow the examples that are set for us. So here at Beth Shalom Synagogue, what we've done is we've gotten rid of all of those perishables that are not recyclable. So we've tried to only have things that can be recycled when we sit down, when we have a meal together. We also have put a bin outside so that we can put all of our food in that hasn't been consumed, so it can be composted and then reused and fertilize the earth. We've also taken time to make sure that we put electric devices in our sanctuary and all around the synagogue and our school that save on electricity. And we're thinking about the possibility now of putting solar panels on our roof as well. That's the discussion that's taking place right now, seeing if we can make that a reality. They don't necessarily produce a lot of power, but whatever they produce is something. And like you said, it becomes an example for other people to want to follow what we do.
Okay, that sounds awesome. So I'm going to pose this question because I'll say for my own personal experience, I've kind of heard this from different individuals. And so I am a member of Bible Way Church of Atlas Road, but I've attended various churches or places of worship, both here in the Columbia area, as well as other states. And so I have seen oftentimes that when we're in our individual places of worship, one of the things that we're looking for is we want kind of more than what we currently have. So regardless of our backgrounds, maybe we grew up in a household or area where there was lack when we were growing up, or we're currently in a state where we don't have a lot of income to meet some of our basic needs or necessities. And so maybe the idea is that, you know, to whomever God that you pray to, you're asking for more. Please, Lord, bless me with more income. Please, Lord, bless me with another job that is bringing in more income. Bless me with a larger home, or all of these tangible things. And so just as a question to you, what would you say to individuals when we're looking or we're seeking a higher power to give us more in the sense of the material side as opposed to something else? And so how can you speak to that when we're thinking about climate change, when we're thinking about sustainability and environmental issues, and we're continuously asking for more material things, but maybe there should be a focus elsewhere. Maybe those material things should go to those who are in need, or maybe what we're really seeking is something more and we're putting it on the tangible items.
Boy, did you say a mouthful.
I'm sorry.
No, it was good. But that's a lot. So let me try to tease some of those points apart. First of all, I would offer the idea that people who are in want pray for what they need. I would also add to that, people who have more than enough should pray for a broken heart. Pray for a broken heart, broken enough so that they can give up some of what they have with people who don't have as much as they have. You know, I would beseech those who have enough to pray to God for the ability to be able to share what they possess. And by the way, there's an old saying that the only thing that we ever possess is what we've given away. But to your question, well, not to your question yet. Let me circle around first before I go into the pointed question. I'm going to teach you a little Hebrew, if I may. So the word angel in Hebrew is malach. The word in Hebrew for messenger is malach. They sound the same, don't they? That's because they are the same.
Okay.
So when you read the Bible and you read the word angel, you in fact could be reinterpreting that legitimately as messenger. Every time you read the word messenger, you may interpret that to mean angel, and you don't know which it means. Based upon context, you interpret it. So, like, for example, there were 3 messengers that came to Abraham. Were they angels, or were they just human beings? Well, the way you read the Bible is the way you interpret it. But here's my point. My point is that anytime a person acts on behalf of God to do an act of righteousness, an act of justice, any time a person does that, they become an angel. Anytime somebody goes with a good word to cheer somebody up, they are an emissary of God. They've grown wings, so to speak. So what I'd like to suggest is that again, whatever we have is meant to be shared with others. The purpose is not to amass wealth, not to aggrandize our own bottom line. Story. Guy dies, goes to heaven, big bench. On the bench is God. Says to the person that died, what do you got to show? Person takes out checkbook. Look at all these zeros in that checkbook. I have all this money. I've accumulated this. I bought this company. I did that. I bought a big car. I have this and that. And the God says to the person, that's not what I want. We only collect receipts here. And I like to think that's demonstrative of that same point of being angels and the purposeful sharing of what we have. What would I say to people who yearn for more? Well, number one, if they're in need, whose fault is it? Is it their fault because they're in need? Are we to blame the poor because they don't have enough? Go out and get a job? It's their fault? No. It's our fault. If we haven't provided them with the necessary tools, if we haven't, as a society, given what they need in order to get by to survive, then we are a flawed society. Don't blame the victim and thereby become a victimizer. However, people who have enough, and maybe this was your question, I'm going to finally, after 25 minutes, get to it.
No, great.
Hey, all of us preachers have been inoculated with phonograph needles, people who want more, maybe we should all take time to say thanksgiving for what we've got. Thank you, God, for not making me blind. Thank you, God, for not making me deaf. Thank you, God, for giving me arms and legs that work. People in my life who care whether I'm alive or dead. Thank you, God, for giving me this meal. I think, were we to take the moments it requires to take notice of the world in which we live and the gifts that we possess, we'd be less hungry, less voracious to accumulate more and more for ourselves. It's not true that he who dies with the most toys wins. It's not true.
Yeah,
Actually,
absolutely.
there's one more point I'll throw in incidentally to this too. There's noted again by this time a 2,000-year-old document, Spring Chicken compared to the other one. When we're born, a baby has fists clenched when they're born, as if to say, I want to gather as much as I possibly can in my hands. When we die, our hands are open. See, I take nothing with me. Maybe we need to think a little bit more clearly about those two bookends of life.
That is a great way to look at it. And hopefully this all speaks to us kind of moving towards more sustainable practices and actions. And so as we're not trying to accumulate more or get more, that'll be less strain on the natural resources that we have or what we're actually doing with the environment. So this has been a great segment, but we're not done yet. We're going to take a look at one more clip, which is going to give us some more points for the final session that I'll have with Rabbi Case. But we're going to take a look at another video from Catherine Hayhoe, and she's going to be talking about the balance between science and faith. And so we'll see what she has to say. It's a little shorter clip, but we'll see what she has to say, and then we'll resume this conversation with Rabbi Jonathan Case.
Well, and we were one of the first times that we went to church in Texas, I met a couple and we were introducing ourselves. They asked, "What do you do?" I explained that I studied global warming, and they said, "Oh, that's wonderful. We need somebody like you to tell our children the right things. You would not believe the lies that they're being taught at school. They told us that the ice in the Arctic is melting and it's threatening the polar bears." And I said, "Well, I'm afraid that that's true." There's often a perceived conflict between science and faith. It's a little bit like coming out of the closet, admitting to people that you are a Christian and you are a scientist. My husband, he is the pastor of an evangelical church, and many people would approach him to ask him questions about climate change. If anything, there's even more questions in the Christian community because we are targeted by so much of the disinformation that's going on. So that's why my husband and I decided to write a book together, a scientist and a pastor, on what a faith-based response to this problem looks like. With climate change, much of our response to this issue is emotional. The fear of how our lives would be irrevocably changed if we uprooted our entire economy, and how our rights to enjoy the luxuries of energy and water might be ripped away from us. Well, as a Christian, we're told that God is not the author of fear. God is love. When we're acting out of fear, we're thinking about ourselves. When we act about love, we are not thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about others, our global neighbors, the poor and the disadvantaged, the people who do not have the resources to adapt. And so I believe that we are called, first of all, to love each other, and second of all, to act. Am I a climate change evangelist? The evangel means good news. Climate change is not really very good news right now. But at the same time, I think it is good news to know that we have choices. And by making wise and responsible choices now, we can ensure that we protect the things that we care about the most on our planet for the benefit of the people who we know personally and those who we don't.
A climate scientist. And so, Rabbi Case, it should go without saying that unfortunately, within the last few years, society as a whole has been dealing with this issue around the belief in science. So whether we're talking about something as it relates to our health or the pandemic that is taking place, there seems to be a conversation about either believing or trusting the science that is out in the world now. And that definitely could be something that is questioned even when we're talking about the environment, sustainability issues, or climate change. And so as someone who actually is, you have a congregation that looks to you for information or for guidance, how do you balance the notion between sharing that of your faith as well as, I guess, giving good scientific information? Or what does that look like for you?
To me, and I think to my faith as well, to our faith, there is no difference between truth and God. If it is godly, it is truth. If it is truth, it is godly. But how to wade through the quagmire of disinformation and find out what is true versus what is untrue. There are sources that should be respected and looked at, and there are sources that are deliberate with trying to simply get people excited, overexcited about things which are just grossly untrue and leading us all down the wrong path. To use the example of the pandemic and the inoculations, the clear science is that if we got 90% of the population of the world inoculated against this coronavirus, the coronavirus would cease to mutate, and we would be finally able to take off our masks and be able to go back to life as we used to know it. But because of the deep suspicions that people harbor that science is lying to them, and that there's some hidden agenda that the government is trying to pull the wool over our eyes, people are not getting inoculated. And as a result, this pandemic is turning into an endemic, meaning it will not have a finish line. It'll just keep morphing from one thing into another. And as more of the population just simply falls prey to it. Science is science. And when science has arrived at a conclusion, and scientists are of a single mind that this is what is healthy, this is the right choice, this is what people need to do, we need to listen to what they have to say. Let me just talk about news for a moment. And I don't want to wax political because I don't want to get into that arena. But when a person tells me they only listen to CNN, or they only listen to Fox, or they only listen to MSNBC, I tell them, please, listen to something else. Two, not in place of. I'm not telling you to change your views. What I am telling you is to be more diverse in the news that you take in. And then fact check. When you hear that something is wrong or something is right, and you raises your hackles or just even raises a question in your mind, take the time to do the investigation. There are websites that you can go to, fact-checked websites that you can go to that will determine the science and let you know whether it is true or whether it is somebody's invention. And we live in a time, unfortunately, when disinformation gets a lot of air, far more air than it should get. And as a result, we, all of us, are suffering terribly from it. There is no such thing as climate change. It's all in somebody's imagination. And yet, when we look at the science and we see the sea level rising, and we see islands that have been inhabited literally disappear, and those ice shelves fall off into the ocean, the science is proven. We have to open our hearts, open our minds to different ways and different modalities of listening to this hard fact science. And if you don't know, you're really conflicted, call somebody who has the answers. Call somebody with the right credentials that can give you the answers to the questions that you seek. Not your next door neighbor, not your husband, not your wife, not your kids. Call somebody with the right credentials. You can find them online. Many of them are at the university. Many are at the local hospitals. You'll get the answers that you seek. They're varied. The medical professionals and the scientists in our community are eager to share the knowledge that they have with anybody who will listen. Just a couple of weeks ago, in the Jewish community, we had 3 doctors as a panel talk about whether it was appropriate to give vaccines to children 5 and up, or whether there were going to be problems as a result of it, because people were floating around different theories about negative consequences of that. We put up 3 doctors for the whole community to see and ask questions to as to the efficacy of the vaccine for children. And they got real answers in real time from real doctors with real qualifications.
So I'll pose this question. As we have scientists to shed more light on climate change and what that means for our communities, whether it's close at hand, so the city of Columbia, the Midlands area, the state of South Carolina, or even if we look globally, personally for you, what is it that you, or I guess more so the question is, what do you envision as a solution moving forward? So whether it's the places of worship and the things that they're doing, whether it's personal responsibility that's being had by those within your congregation, maybe it's an effort or initiative that your place of worship or other places of worship choose to do. But ideally, what would you like to see as a viable solution to actually address this? Because as part of our conversation has been, we're all connected, whether we're here in South Carolina, whether we're somewhere else across the world. The things that we do and we engage in are going to affect one another. And so as we're getting more information, as we're learning more, what would you think would be a viable solution, whether big or small?
Yeah. Again, a great question, and a question that we should all be asking ourselves, because we all are puzzle pieces in the grand mosaic of what is happening in the world. We all are part of the problem, and we all are part of the potential solution. So what is the solution? The solution is whatever we're doing right now that contributes to the problem, make some sort of an effort to change that. It can be big, it can be small, but if we all do something, it doesn't matter what that something is. Plant a tree. It might be stop using pesticides that are also toxins to the environment. It could be stop using as much water as you're using for whatever purposes you're using it for. Do a larger laundry wash rather than several small ones. Try to use detergents that are earth friendly. Try to recycle. If you have the ability to be able to use lower wattage bulbs, do that. If you have the ability to be able to use the high voltage energy savers on the roof that turn the sun rays into electricity, it doesn't matter, big or small. What matters is that we all get into the game and do one thing. Doesn't one and one, and one and one, and one and one, and one and one, and suddenly the earth has changed. It doesn't matter how much. What matters is that we strive to do something.
And on that note, I think you have said probably the best thing that we can take away is that we have to start from somewhere and we have to do something. So Rabbi Case, I want to thank you for this great conversation. Your insight as well as your stories have been great. Before we end off, I do want to give the floor to you to share any last words or thoughts, whether it's specifically about climate change or just the efforts that you're doing at Beth Shalom, or just in general.
Well, first of all, let me thank you and Bob for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And I hope that everybody can pack their suitcase and put some of the stuff that we talked about into that suitcase and then unpack it as they're having dinner tomorrow night and the next night, and be able to make this a conversation at the dinner table. What can we as a family do, or me as an individual do? What a wonderful conversation that would be between mom and dad and the kids to say, we're talking about global warming and we're talking about so much toxins emptied into the environment. What can we as a family do as one small thing that we can possibly do that's not going to stretch us thin, but something that we all can do, and have that conversation at the table? Maybe picking up cans and then recycling them. Could be recycling paper that we're not doing right now. But do something that matters to you, make a difference. You know what? It's funny that it's catching. This can go viral too. Besides the COVID-19, taking care of the earth can also go viral. So if we do make this conversation with our family, and then we make it with our cousins, and then with aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and church members and synagogue members, wouldn't that be a wonderful virus to spread?
Absolutely. So again, Rabbi Case, thank you. This has been an enlightening conversation, and I hope for our viewing audience, you were able to take away a lot of good things that you can either share with your various congregations or places of worship, or as Rabbi Case has said, taking it back to your individual circles, whether it's your families, whether it's your friends, or other places where you are you're in close contact with individuals. So again, thank you, Rabbi Case. And we're going to begin wrapping up this quarterly seminar. Excuse me. So the last thing that I would like to share before we end is that there was a lot of great resources that were provided. And so as you saw earlier, we had the opportunity to see Bob Petrulis actually have a conversation with Dr. Cynthia Mo Lobita, and there was actually a book that she referenced. And so I actually want to share that, because if there are some of you that are interested in actually purchasing that book or renting that book, which would be one of the more sustainable ways, then we can actually give you that resource. Oops. So the name of her book is Resisting Structural Evil, Love as Ecological Economic Vocation. And so again, this is by Dr. Cynthia Mo Lobita. So definitely check it out. If it's a book that is at your local bookstore, one that you can rent from the library or even find at another site, definitely pick it up and hopefully get some more additional information. And also, if you are interested in the City of Columbia's Climate Protection Action Committee, or CPAC, we have at least 2 ways in which you can actually get in contact with us. There is the actual website, and so you can do a search for Climate Protection Action Campaign, CPAC Columbia at columbiasc.gov. Or you also have the opportunity to reach out to us at cpaccolumbiasc@gmail.com. So again, that is cpaccolumbiasc@gmail.com. And so with that being said, again, my name is Dr. Tamara Warren, an appointee for CPAC. And I do want to thank you for being with us this evening for our quarterly webinar. As for some of you who have seen this before, we like to dig into different topics as it relates to climate change and sustainability. And so we thought that this would be a great opportunity to really get into something that is really dear to a lot of us. That is our religion, our faith and beliefs. And so I hope that you get a lot out of the conversations. Again, I would like to thank Rabbi Jonathan Case from Beth Shalom Synagogue. Again, I would also like to thank Dr. Robert Walker from Shandon Presbyterian Church for the tips that he provided. Another thanks to Catherine Hayhoe for the videos that were provided, as well as the conversation that was done with Dr. Cynthia Mo Lobita, as well as Robert Petrulis, who is also another appointee for CPAC. So From all of us at CPAC, as well as for all of those that you were able to see tonight, we thank you for attending. For those of you in Columbia, we hope that you have a safe evening as we have inclement weather, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Have a good evening. Goodbye.